Hello, ACU students in the Philippines. I'm still working out of town, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it tonight for the meeting, which will be your morning. So I decided to record the lesson, which is okay because we're actually ahead of schedule, so I'm not going to give you much today, but I will give you probably some additional reading to go through. So we're going to start here. And I hope you can see my screen. And if this doesn't work, then I don't know what's going on. Okay, we got to this part here talking about the Sicarii, the knife men, and who they were. And I wanted to get to Acts 21:38. So if you want to turn there, Acts 21:38. This is, of course, talking about the Jerusalem mob. So let's start in 37. Then as Paul was about to be led into the barracks, he said to the commander, "May I speak to you?" And he said, "Can you speak Greek?" Verse 38, "Are you not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a rebellion and led the 4,000 assassins into the wilderness?" Now, the Bible really is not clear exactly what this incident is, but you see there the idea of the assassins. And what the Sicarii knife men would do, they would be probably known today as modern terrorists. Excuse me. They would, if there were Jew collaborators with the Romans, sometimes they would hide these knives in their clothing in a crowd, and they would just go up and just kill these people for doing that, because they were very, very pro-Jewish and believed in killing anyone that was not in favor of throwing the Romans out of Palestine, out of Judea, out of Jerusalem, and so forth. So that's why these guys are kind of interesting in the fact that they were very pro-Jewish, and they didn't mind to use violence to get what they needed. And they were part, again, of the Zealot movement in there. Okay, as we move on, we're going to talk about the Gentiles. So we had the Jews, and now these are the Gentiles that will affect things that happen in the New Testament. The first group we're going to talk about are the Greeks. And this was the result of the Greek conquest that was started by Alexander the Great. And let's see, I think in your book, the pages that that I printed out for you, you'll see this information on page 26, where the Greek Empire and the Persian Empire were enemies. You guys, it's probably a little bit too much history for you to know all of this. But just make sure you get this, what I've written down here are just the basics, okay? Now, one thing you can do as we move along is you can actually just pause the video and go ahead and write this information down and then start it up again. So that's why I'm not going to really stop and wait for you to write this down. So anyway, so after you get this written down, then you can push play, and then I'll talk about each one. So as I said, the Greeks and the Persians were enemies. Once Alexander's father, Philip, decided to unite the Greek governments together and create one nation of Greek culture. His name is Philip, and that's where we get the capital of that area as Philippi, where we get, of course, Philippians. So anyway, so that history there is on page 26 and 27, and so you can read that. But basically, as Alexander the Great crossed the Aegean Sea over to modern-day Turkey, he conquered this area very swiftly. The Greeks had a great system at that time, the best military system to go. They were very well organized, very disciplined. And we have to understand that the Greeks, who come from a, we would say the birth of democracy, where they had democracy, philosophy. The Greek nation was very rich, and nations that are very rich can have time to sit around and talk about this stuff, and so that happens here in the United States. When you have people who don't work, they just sit around and solve the world's problems, right? Because everyone else is out working, and they're just sitting around talking about how to save the world and different thoughts on life and so forth. So the Greeks did this. They were economically rich because they had a great economic system. And so as we look at number 1 here, we see the movement of Greek abroad, which really was a military conquest. As you know, back then, empires got stronger by conquering other people. And so Alexander organized the Greek people and went over to modern-day Turkey and took over that land. And I think there may be, let's see, there's some, there's kind of a map on page 31, where you see Macedonia, and so you can see how Alexander crossed the Aegean Sea to conquer modern-day Turkey, which would be the Persian Empire. Now that's important. Why is it important? Well, instead of just conquering and burning and killing and things like that, he would actually go to a city and say, hey, you're surrounded. I'm Alexander the Great. I've arrived on the scene, and you need to surrender, or I'm going to kill you. And so some cities did, and some cities did not. Those that did, he would march in and basically take over the city and introduce Greek culture, because the Greeks thought their culture was the best in the world, and that other countries, other empires, other groups of people should have the Greek culture because it was so superior. It was superior in language, it was superior in political thought, it was superior in philosophy and gods. It was superior because they had the Zeus and Athena and all these Greek gods, and that's why they were better than the other empires out there. There's actually a story in secular history that Alexander the Great came to Jerusalem and say, I've surrounded the city, I'm going to take it over. And the story goes, as you may have heard, that some of the Jewish leaders, and what time period? We're talking about 325 AD, about 300 years before Christ. Excuse me. So there's a story that Alexander was outside of the gates of Jerusalem, and some elders from the Jewish nation there met him outside the gates. And Alexander said, hey, I'm from Greece. I have a great empire. I've come here to take over your city. And the elders said, the story goes that he fell asleep that night, and he had a dream that some men from the city would come to speak to him, and that he should listen to them. And so you say, well, is this God at work here? Well, we don't know, but supposedly when the Jewish leaders came out of the city to meet Alexander, he said, I'm here to take over, and I have a great empire, and you need to surrender. And supposedly they grabbed the book of Daniel, chapter 2, and said, yes, we knew you were coming. Right here you are. And then Alexander remembered his dream and was amazed at how the Jewish leaders knew he was coming and this and that. And so he actually spared the city. So, and in fact, that is a fact in history that Jerusalem was not destroyed. And so, if you say, well, that was just a coincidence. Well, it's interesting because the city of Tyre, near there, up there, was destroyed. Very near Jerusalem, it was destroyed because it did not surrender to Alexander. So why was Tyre destroyed and yet Jerusalem remained? And there were no Greek people that took over a city. He might have left some people there, but he did not destroy the city. And you can think, well, the Jews surely would not just surrender the city to a Gentile, heathen, no good, dirty rascal like Alexander the Great, right? Okay, anyway, that's just a story, and you can Google it and see what you think about that. So where are we? Okay, number 2. So the spread of Greek culture. So when Alexander the Great and his men would go into these cities, they would spread the Greek culture. And again, so Jeremy, why is this important? Well, it's important because it will affect everything in the New Testament. It will affect everything in the first century, as we will find out. Number 3, again, they had a unified economic system where they had coinage, they had coins, they had a capitalistic society because, to be honest, they believed strongly in education. Okay, they believed strongly in education. Alexander the Great was actually taught by Aristotle. That was his tutor, who taught him math and things like that. Pythagoras, if you remember in school, the Pythagoras theorem in geometry and stuff, that all comes from Greek. What is that? A squared plus B squared equals C squared for a triangle. Okay, so all that comes from Greek mathematical thought. The spread of the Greek language. This number 4 is going to be very, very important because as you know, the New Testament is in Greek. It's in called Koine Greek, which means common Greek, which means koine is also the word in Greek for fellowship, people getting together. So this type of Greek allowed, when Alexander went into a city, he said, hey, our language is better. You're going to learn the Greek language. So all that area around there ended up speaking the Greek language, and they all had a common language, Koine Greek, common language that they could all do business with, that you could talk to each other. So as Alexander went around these cities and established this Greek culture, one of the things was to learn the Greek language. And that helped, as we'll learn, that helped the spread of the gospel, because Paul and all these other disciples and apostles, who 99% were sure knew Greek, and they were taught as a child because to survive you had to learn the Greek language. And so that's what happened there. And again, number 5, I already touched on a higher level of education. The Greeks were strongly believed in education, and they would set up the idea of the tutor system, where especially the rich families would hire tutors to teach their kids. You know, that there was no, like, everyone didn't go to elementary school and like you have today. Only the rich could really afford to have this type of education. And usually slaves were part of this tutor system. And that's why in the Bible, there's a lot of references to tutors and slaves. And sometimes the Greek word in there can mean the same thing. So we have to be careful when we translate the Bible from Greek to English that we understand what the context is. So a higher level of education. Number 6, the spread of the Greek system of religion, which I've already touched on. A lot of these pagan cities that they overtook might have some sort of religion, but it really wasn't organized. You know, they might have worshipped a tree or a rock or something, and you know, would throw blood on it or this and that. But they really didn't have a organized system of religion, so that when the Greeks came and they said, "Oh no, you know, your gods are wrong. Zeus is the ultimate, the high god, and he has these others under him. Poseidon is god of the sea, and so forth." And these people were just like, "Wow, you know, you guys really, really understand this stuff." Yeah, yeah, we do, because we're Greek and we have a higher level of education, and so you need to follow our religion. And so many of them did. Okay, so here you can pause it and write this down, and then just press play, and I'll continue giving you just the ultimate of information. Okay, I hope you paused it and you've written this down, and now you've played this video. So as we continue with the Greek, number 7 was the spread of Greek philosophy. As I mentioned, and I think the book may also mention that too, somewhere or another, I can't remember exactly where, but I don't want you guys to get too bogged down in the different types of philosophy, which we could go into Stoicism and Epicureanism and so forth. But what I want you to understand is that the Greeks had a different philosophy on the way of life. Okay, we're in this life. This is how you live. Okay, now why is that going to be important? Now remember what Paul did in chapter 17 of Acts. Remember Acts 17 when he goes to Athens? Verse 22, he says, he stood in the midst of the Acropolis and said, "Men of Athens, I perceive in all things that you are very religious." Okay, so he tells the people of Athens, "I see you are very religious." And so he goes forth and talks about their religion. And Paul actually in a few places will actually quote some Greek philosophers in 1 Corinthians, also in I think it's either 1st or 2nd Timothy. There'll be little phrases that come from Greek philosophy thinking, and his point being that you know, trying to help teach them, the Gentiles, about Christ. Okay, so the spread of Greek philosophy. Number 8, the growth of the importance of the city, the polis. This I can't stress enough how important this was. In fact, that the Greeks not only had a system of philosophy, of language, of learning, but also of government. And so they had this idea of, again, how to govern cities, how to organize them, and that cities would be more dominant in this area instead of maybe farmers out in, you know, away from the city that had the land and the big houses. And the Greeks would emphasize the importance of the city because it's where most of the people were. It's where commerce could happen. And, you know, I guess today, if you want to see a comparison, maybe you know how big Manila is, and most of the wealth of the Philippines is in Manila because of the population, because of the commerce, because of the economic stuff. So cities have always been important, but back then it was more important because what happened is when you get people in a city, they have to eat. Okay, well, they have to buy stuff. All right, well, then a farmer gets money for food, but he's got to buy um, maybe his children's education. So he sends it back to the city, the money and tutors and stuff. And so that's how the economic system starts to happen. Number 9, the growth of individualism. Um, this is very important. Again, this probably goes more with number 7 too, that the Greeks believed in meaning of life, that each person, and if you read Greek philosophy, you'll find out they did understand some sort of concept of a soul, right? Because when you died, they went to Hadia, Hades, and so they understood this as individual. They knew the idea of right and wrong, and they knew basic, murder was wrong and stealing. I'm not saying they were good Christians, but I'm saying is here we have the growth of the individualism, the growth of persons being aware that your existence is just as important as anybody else's. So number 10, after the death of Alexander, about 336 BC, his empire was split between his generals. Now, you could do a whole class, a whole semester just on Greek, the effects of Greek in the New Testament or the effect of Greek in the first century. But because this is a survey course, we're just going to kind of run over this pretty quickly. All right, so, and you can find, I think I mentioned that later. All right, there we go. Okay, so pause it here, write this down, and start again. Okay, hope you got that written down. Number 11 is to make sure, I wanted to put this in, make sure you read about Antiochus IV on page 27 and the Maccabean Hasmonean period on page 27 through 29. This is probably going to be very important in setting up some of the stuff that's going to happen in the New Testament in the first century. Even though this is about 200 BC to 120 BC, this is going to affect everything that's going on. And we know that God's providence is always in work here, that, again, Jesus came at the fullness of time, right? And so as we think about that, we need to understand that, let's see, I'm thinking, okay, that's Galatians 4:4. Galatians 4:4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman, born under the law. So we know here that everything is working for Jesus to come at the right period of time, and this is all part of it. The Greek language. Antiochus IV was, I just want you to read about that on pages 27. And then read about the Maccabean and the Hasmonean period because that works all the way up to the first century. And on page 29 where you see the domination of Rome, I think I've talked about that, so I don't think you have to read to there, but at least on page 29, read at the end, right before the domination of Rome. Okay, number 2 on the Gentiles, as we talk about the Gentiles, let's talk about the Romans. And this probably, actually, let me fix this here. This should be, number 2. There we go, that's better. Let's save that. Okay. And from current slide. There we go. See how easy that was? Oh, I went too far. Okay, I'm going to pause it here and go ahead and write this down. Okay, we're back. So, um, so as we talk about the Gentiles and the Romans, um, we see here that the Romans had an early beginning, was a republic, and again, you know, we're not going to read into that, but you're talking about um, right around the time of Alexander the Great is when Rome is starting to be founded, to organize. Again, they had little city places, little city states in Rome, and they come together and they form a republic. They did have a couple of kings that they call in Latin as rex, and they did not like kings at all. And it's funny, the Romans didn't mind emperors, but they did not like kings, okay, because they didn't like the idea of you have a king and he has a son, and therefore he's automatically the ruler just because he's the son, okay. Romans wasn't going to go for that. They didn't fall for that. You had to be worthy to be a leader of the Roman Empire and so forth. So as they started here, Rome started out as a republic. And you know that's interesting history where the people would have a say in who would be leader. Now I'm not talking about everyday people. These would be the rich, super rich, powerful people that could choose their leader, but at least it's a start, okay? Expansion by military means. Um, their biggest step forward was in 146 BC when they defeated Carthage. You remember if you've ever heard of Hannibal, not Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs and other crazy movies, but this is the real Hannibal, who was a military genius from Carthage, which is in just very close to Rome in North Africa. And they had a rivalry between each other. And so, um, again, you can read about that. Hannibal actually went to Italy and surrounded the Roman city for years, and they could never catch him. This was the guy who would he would ride elephants into battle, and when elephants come on the battlefield, the other people were usually so scared that they would run off because they saw all these big, massive elephants coming. They really weren't very effective in battle because elephants really will not run over people. They don't like to step on people and stuff. But anyway, it was a good fear tactic. That was elephant warfare terrorism, I guess. All right, so number three, internal civil wars brought the first emperor. As with any great empire, you know, they went through their ups and downs. They had these leaders, and then they had people fighting for to be the leader. Um, and so, and I'm giving you just a real general, you know, again, you could books are written on just what I'm telling you, but the internal fighting, finally, people got so tired of fighting. Um, the civil wars that would happen between Mark Antony and Cleopatra, if you've ever heard of her in Egypt, in all these wars, and they finally got tired of it, and so Julius Caesar's son, Octavian Augustus, becomes the first emperor. And what that means is he's been given a lot of power to stop the violence, okay? And he's basically become a dictator. And so that's going to be important too, again, because this is going to affect part of Palestine, which is where Rome is now located, okay? And we may probably get into later, but the reason why Rome was interested in where Palestine and Jerusalem is because they wanted a buffer between it and the Persian Empire. So the Persian Empire became Rome's greatest rival, especially in Asia. And so it wanted that area as what we would call a buffer area. If you know that term, they wanted a cushion between Rome and a cushion between the Persian Empire. So in the middle was Jerusalem and all this, and so that's why they wanted that, to give them more land in case something happened. Okay, go ahead and pause it and write this down. Okay, we're back. So as we continue with the Romans, the emperors in the New Testament, I just want you to write this down because there are obviously a lot of them, but some of these I want you to write down. Let's see, how much did I put down? I want you to take these notes. I'll let you know on the test before you take the test how much of this you'll have to know. I know these dates are sometimes hard to remember, so probably these that just were affected by Jesus will be important. So the emperors in the New Testament, you have Augustus, again Octavius Augustus, who was around in 27 BC to 14 AD. And in here you have the birth of Jesus. You see how that plays into? After Augustus, you have Tiberius, who would be in 14 AD to 37 AD, and he would be around during the ministry of Jesus. You have an emperor called Caligula. This in Latin means little boots, and this was the crazy one, really. He was just a real crazy, probably mental, something was wrong with him mentally. Demanded all to worship him. You know, it's interesting if you read all this. If you were in Rome during this period, the idea of worshiping the emperor was strange. I mean, it's very weird to worship the emperor if you lived in Rome during this period and before. No one worshiped the emperor in Rome. But as you got away from Rome, so say Jerusalem, all these areas in Ephesus and Thessalonica and so forth, they would worship the Roman emperor as a god. And, you know, the Roman emperor would be, well, you know, whatever, that's fine with me. But Caligula tried to get everyone to worship him, placed a statue of himself at the temple in Jerusalem, and, you know, obviously just didn't work out, right? Okay, let's see, okay, we'll finish up here with the Romans. Okay, so go ahead and pause it and write this down. Okay, we're back. So we have the Romans, and number 4 as we go to the continue with the emperors in the New Testament. Here's number 4, Nero, which will be familiar because he ruled from 54 to 68. He's the one who persecuted the Christians. Probably only in Rome. He didn't really do a nationwide, an empire-wide crusade and persecute Christians. You know, here you have the just a lot of persecution of Christians. I don't want to give you too much detail. It's just not important for this class. Peter and Paul is kind of interesting here. Peter and Paul probably died under Nero, probably later towards in the 60s. Excuse me. Vespasian was an emperor, and you see that he becomes emperor in 69 through 79, and he was actually just a commander when he destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. Okay, and then he became emperor after that. So he gets everything ready and is emperor during the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, go ahead and pause it here and write this down. Okay, we're back. All right, so number 4, continuing with the emperors in the New Testament. Number 6 is Domitian, and he ruled from 81 to 96. And this is the one who probably persecuted the Christians even more. And, when you take other classes, you'll find out that, in the beginning when Christianity started, from a Roman perspective, they didn't think it was any different than Judaism. Okay, they thought the Jews and Christians were the same people. Okay, they didn't really care about the details. Um, so later, as Christianity is becoming more popular, it's growing, it's spreading outside of Jerusalem. They're teaching to worship Jesus, this man who walked on the earth, several years ago. They're like, what's going on here? This could be a problem. So they persecuted the Christians severely, and this is probably the time that Revelation was written in response to this persecution. Um, again, Revelation is so misunderstood here in the United States, as it probably is there too. Sometimes, this kind of end of the world stuff, but we got to realize that, Revelation 1:1 tells us everything. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants things which must shortly take place. Things which must shortly take place. That means the things that were happening was about to take place. Well, what were the things coming? Well, the persecution. Okay, these Christians were dying. They were being persecuted. Revelation, through the inspiration of John, tells them to remain faithful, that you'll be victorious in the end. We know it's horrible. There's a lot of death and so forth. But Domitian was the emperor who ruled during this time. Okay, we're gonna stop here. Okay, so let's stop here, and this gives you enough, and we're okay because we're ahead of time. So this may not be an hour session, but that's okay. Be sure you are thinking about your topic for your paper, and I've still not sent you the format, which is not a big deal because you won't be doing any formatting right now. Once you pick your topic, go ahead and start your research and try to get this done early, and do the research part of it from now until January, and then February start writing the paper, and I'm going to be heavily involved in that process with you, so that you can have a good paper. And hopefully this will be a good time for you to learn the SBL format, and then you can use it in your other classes. And I know Sir Edwin Gallagher would probably really like for you to use the SBL format. And it's okay on this paper because it's just 5 pages, and so we can get a good flavor and a good dose of it. Okay, well, I will sign off for now. Thank you so much for being attentive, and just email me if you have any questions. Other than that, I will say farewell and goodbye.